He wasn't trying to make a scene. He just wanted to fly like everyone else, sit in seat 1A, and land without trouble. But one woman looked at his skin, not his ticket, and slapped him in front of a silent cabin. What would you do if no one stood up when it mattered most? Think about that as we begin. And if this story makes you feel something, let it sit with you, and maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Now let's go back to where it started, just before the cabin door closed. He wasn't trying to draw attention. 16-year-old Jordan Miller just wanted to make it through his first solo flight without a single issue. No spotlight, no special treatment, just one peaceful trip. He sat in seat 1A, quietly buckled in, hoodie up, earbuds in, ticket pulled up on his phone, ready to disappear into the corner of first class like any other passenger. But not everyone saw him that way. Across the cabin, the lead flight attendant, Dana Walsh, had already scanned the row once, her eyes narrowing slightly when she saw him. She didn't smile. She didn't offer water like she had to the older couple in 1C and 1D. She walked up to him with clipped heels and a tighter-than-usual jaw. Her voice cut through the soft hum of the cabin like static. "This seat's reserved for first class." Jordan looked up, startled. He tugged down one earbud. "Yes, ma'am, it's mine." Dana didn't glance at the phone in his hand. Instead, she turned to the woman seated next to him, Livia Harper, who was calmly placing her carry-on in the overhead bin. A woman who had cared for Jordan since he was a toddler. A woman who, in that moment, already sensed what this was turning into. Livia offered a small, polite smile and pulled out her phone. "We have the email confirmation right here. His father booked both seats." Dana didn't even look at the screen. She waved a dismissive hand. "That won't be necessary. I need you both to move. Now." Jordan shifted slightly in his seat, confused, embarrassed. He glanced around. A few heads turned, then quickly turned away. No one spoke, but everyone was listening. Jordan cleared his throat and said softly, "This is my seat." That was it. That was the moment. Before Livia could respond, before Jordan could show the confirmation again, Dana raised her hand and slapped him. A sharp, open-palmed strike across his cheek. The sound cracked through the cabin. A coffee cup rattled. A woman gasped audibly, covering her mouth. A man in business attire stiffened and looked away. Livia froze, her hand still mid-motion, phone trembling between her fingers. Jordan didn't move. He sat still, eyes wide, mouth parted slightly. He blinked, once, twice, but didn't speak. He didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't give her what she probably expected. He simply reached into his hoodie pocket, unlocked his phone, and began to type. His fingers moved with surprising calm, even as his cheek pulsed red from the blow. "She slapped me. First class, flight 614. He hit send. 3 rows back, a phone buzzed quietly. Moments later, Jordan's screen lit up with a reply. "Sit tight. I'm on board." The cabin, once buzzing with pre-flight chatter, had gone utterly still. Dana walked away without saying another word, retreating toward the front galley like nothing had happened. But something had happened. And the person she just struck? He was far from ordinary. He was the last person she should have touched. He sat still in 1A, his cheek quietly burning, his phone resting in his palm. But Jordan Miller didn't let the sting on his face change the way he held himself. This wasn't the first time he'd been misjudged. It wasn't even the worst time. He'd grown up learning how to hold still while the world made assumptions about who he was. From a young age, Jordan had always been the quiet one. While other boys shouted answers in class or argued back when they were misunderstood, he stayed calm, watched, and waited. He didn't speak unless it mattered. His father used to say, "Loud voices may get attention, but still minds win the room." That voice, his father's, wasn't on the plane with him today. For the first time in his life, Jordan was flying without Dominic Miller beside him. No private jet, no assistants, no security detail trailing behind, just a regular first-class seat, a hoodie, and the woman who'd raised him since he could walk. Miss Livia sat quietly beside him now, her hands folded, but her eyes watchful. She could feel it too, the shift in energy, the bruising silence of the cabin, the ripple of judgment that had landed on Jordan the moment he walked in. And yet Jordan hadn't said a word. He reached down, opened the front pocket of his backpack, and pulled out a small envelope. It was from his father, handwritten, folded neatly, no fancy company logo, just his name on the front in black ink. Jordan had read the letter 3 times before boarding. But now, after what had just happened, he read it again. You're stronger than they think. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Let the silence speak for you, son. I'll always be listening. He folded it carefully and tucked it back inside. Beside him, Livia leaned in, her voice low and gentle. You okay, baby? Jordan nodded once. Livia paused for a moment, looking at his face, then glanced toward the aisle. Dana was nowhere in sight. Still, her presence lingered like stale perfume. Then Livia spoke again, this time softer, more to herself than to him. Your mama, she would have known what to say. Jordan looked at her. Tell me about her again. Livia smiled, bittersweet. She was fierce, but never loud. They didn't like that. She once walked into a job interview with a master's degree in one hand and your baby picture in the other. But the minute they saw her name, Amara, they thanked her for coming and never called again. Jordan's eyes dropped. Because of her name? Livia nodded. Sometimes, baby, they don't even wait to hear your story. They think they already know it just by looking at you or reading a name they can't pronounce. She reached over and gently straightened his hoodie. But you're going to teach them to look again and listen better. Jordan didn't respond. He didn't have to. Because even without words, even without making a scene, he knew this moment wasn't just about one slap. It was about something that started long before Dana walked down that aisle. The hum of the engine had returned, but the tension in the cabin hadn't eased. From her position near the galley, Dana Walsh glanced back toward seat 1A, jaw clenched. She took a breath, straightened her blazer, and turned on her heel. Her steps were sharper now, measured, intentional. When she stopped beside Jordan's row again, her voice wasn't cold anymore, it was loud. I've asked once already. You need to move to your assigned seats in economy. First class is for paying passengers only. The words dropped heavy, louder than necessary, designed to be overheard. Livia rose slowly, calm but firm. We showed you the booking confirmation, Miss Walsh. His father paid for these seats in full. Dana didn't blink. She didn't ask to see it again. She waved her hand with visible irritation, voice tight. Anyone can screenshot a confirmation. You'll need to return to your correct seats or I'll notify the captain. Several heads turned this time. The businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. A young woman in row 2 leaned forward, frowning. She looked at Jordan, then at Livia. Excuse me, the woman said. Voice soft but steady, but Dana cut her off, tone firm and rehearsed. Ma'am, please mind your seat. This is a crew matter. The woman blinked. Her mouth stayed open for a second longer. Then she leaned back, lips pressed together. Across the cabin, a quiet unease began to ripple. It didn't roar, it didn't rise, but it was there, settling in like static beneath the hum of air vents and clinking glasses. A few passengers shifted. One man adjusted his tie. Another woman slowly slid her book into her lap and stared blankly ahead. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others looked down at their phones, not to read but to pretend. Not a single word left their lips, not even a murmur. Jordan sat still. He didn't speak, he didn't argue. He just reached for his phone, unlocked it quietly, opened the voice recorder app, and tapped the red button. Then he placed the device face down on the armrest. A small red dot blinked in silence, capturing every word, every tone, every pause. Across the aisle, April Torres stood frozen. She had been midway through a drink service, now halted with the cart still between rows. She had heard the slap. She had heard the second confrontation, and now she was watching the boy, 16, silent, sitting straighter than anyone else in the cabin. April's hands gripped the edge of the cart tighter. Her heart pounded. Her conscience screamed, say something. But her lips didn't move. Dana was her supervisor. She was new, still on probation. She needed this job, so she said nothing. And in doing so, she said everything. Jordan didn't flinch, didn't look at her. He just reached back into the front pocket of his hoodie, not for his phone this time, but for the envelope his father had given him before the flight. He didn't open it. He just held it, gripped it like armor. The paper, soft from being folded and refolded, sat neatly in his palm. His thumb brushed over the ink, his name written in bold strokes by a man who'd taught him to stand tall even while sitting down. He remembered the line he'd read earlier. You don't need to shout to be heard. Even now, surrounded by accusation, suspicion, and the deafening quiet of strangers pretending not to notice, he remembered another line, spoken not in ink, but in his father's voice. Let them doubt you. Just don't let them define you. Jordan inhaled quietly. His fingers tightened around the envelope. He wasn't moving. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't shrinking. Because this was his seat. And whether they liked it or not, he belonged. There's a certain kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The kind that comes after something wrong has happened, and everyone knows it, but no one moves. That was the silence in the cabin. Jordan sat in 1A, shoulders square, envelope still gripped in his hand. Livia beside him, eyes narrowed but voice withheld. April frozen by the drink cart. Dana standing near the row like a guard in a courtroom. And somewhere, 3 rows back, someone stood up. Not abruptly, not with anger, but with purpose. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark, tailored suit. Quiet shoes, straight back, hands calm at his sides. He didn't need to raise his voice. People turned before he spoke. They felt it. Some instinct inside them shifting. The businessman looked up. The woman in row 2 sat straighter. Even April's breath caught in her throat. He walked slowly, deliberately, down the narrow aisle of first class. And then he stopped beside Dana. She turned mid-sentence to another attendant, her smile automatic, until she saw him. Her face dropped. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked at her. Direct, controlled. "You slapped my son." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The cabin fell even quieter, as if the air itself had frozen. Dana blinked. She looked toward Jordan, then back to the man standing in front of her. Her voice came out thin and rushed. I didn't know." The man didn't blink. "You didn't ask. You decided." That sentence, calm, factual, was heavier than any shout could have been. Passengers began turning their heads, not pretending anymore. Eyes moved from Dana to Jordan to the man in the suit. Recognition started to spark. Dominic Miller, founder and CEO of Elevate Air, owner of the airline they were sitting on, and the father of the boy in seat 1A. Dana's lips trembled slightly. I thought there was a mistake." Dominic didn't lean forward. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence pressed down like thunder. "You thought, that's the problem. Did you verify his ticket?" Dana faltered. I looked at it, but did you call to confirm?" "No, I didn't think. You didn't think you needed to, so instead you put your hands on him." Her face flushed red. Her body stiffened. Dominic stepped once, just once, closer. "You saw a black boy in a hoodie, and you assumed." Dana opened her mouth, but no answer came. She looked around now, desperately, at April, at the passengers, at anyone who might save her. No one spoke. No one moved. Phones were recording. Eyes were locked. The power she'd held just minutes ago had evaporated into the pressurized air. Dominic didn't even look at her anymore. His attention turned toward Jordan, who hadn't flinched once since his father stood. Jordan looked back, steady. "You good?" Dominic asked. Jordan gave a small nod. Dana's voice came out again, softer now. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Dominic turned, slowly. "You didn't mean for me to be here." A pause. Then, "But you meant every part of what you did to him." He glanced over at April. "Call the captain. Tell him Dominic Miller would like a word." April nodded silently and moved fast. Dana looked at the floor. Dominic remained where he was, a hand resting on the headrest of Jordan's seat. Passengers who'd once avoided eye contact now looked directly at him, with recognition, with unease, with something like shame. Livia reached for Jordan's hand under the blanket and gave it a gentle squeeze. Jordan exhaled slowly, then looked forward again. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. Not just power, but truth. Because the man they'd ignored was now undeniable. And the boy they'd dismissed was no longer alone. Dominic didn't move from where he stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand an audience. But the cabin, first class and beyond, had already fallen into a kind of quiet order, as if everyone knew something bigger than a slap had just happened. He turned slightly, looked down the aisle toward the front of the cabin, and motioned with 2 fingers. April Torres approached. Her face was pale, but her posture steady. She stopped in front of him, unsure whether to speak first. Dominic spared her the burden. "I need to speak to the captain, right now." April nodded quickly. She turned and slipped behind the curtain to the crew's intercom. Less than a minute passed before she returned, holding the handset. Dominic took it calmly, pressed it to his ear. "Captain, this is Dominic Miller." A brief pause. "I assume you've been briefed. Good. I want the lead attendant relieved of duty immediately." Another pause. She's not to speak to any more passengers. She is not to issue instructions. She's to be removed from cabin operations for the rest of the flight. April stood just a few feet away, hearing every word. Dominic handed the phone back, then turned to her, softening just slightly. "You don't need to fix what happened," he said quietly. "You just need to stop it from happening again." April's eyes welled briefly, not with emotion, but with relief. She nodded, and for the first time in the entire flight, her shoulders loosened. At the far end of the aisle, Dana stood stiffly near the galley, pretending to reorganize cups she'd already stacked. She didn't look up. Dominic didn't look at her either. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped into a secure airline app. A few swipes, a single facial scan. He issued an alert to ground operations. Security detail needed at Gate 4 upon arrival. Stand by for passenger escort. Just a few words. No drama. No spectacle. But the kind of words that made systems move. In row 2, the woman who tried to speak earlier leaned to her husband. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly. "She's done." Someone across the aisle raised a phone discreetly. Screen pointed down the cabin. The buzz had begun. Not loud, not panicked. Just a quiet spread of awareness, people whispering in restrained voices, their words mixing with the mechanical hum of flight. "That's the CEO? He's the owner, isn't he? She hit his son? On camera? Did she really say he didn't belong?" Phones were out, not waving, just recording, observing, but this time they weren't pretending not to see. Dominic remained by Jordan's row. Livia looked up at him, her voice low. "You want to sit?" He shook his head. "Not yet." He looked at his son. Jordan hadn't moved, he hadn't spoken. But in his silence, he had pulled the full weight of accountability into the air. Dominic placed one hand on the headrest in front of him, steady. The flight continued, but everything else had shifted. Power wasn't in the uniform anymore. It was in the truth that now had witnesses. The cabin had quieted again, but not like before. This time, the silence wasn't ignorance. It was awareness. Jordan sat still in 1A, the envelope from his father now resting on his lap. His fingers brushed the edge as he stared out the window, not really seeing the clouds beyond it. Beside him, Livia leaned in slightly, her voice low. "How you holding up?" Jordan didn't answer right away. He blinked once, then finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Would she still have slapped me if I were white?" Livia's heart cracked a little. She didn't try to answer quickly, didn't fill the silence with comfort. She just reached over, placed her hand gently over his, and let the weight of the question settle between them. Because that silence, that stillness, was its own kind of truth. In the crew galley, near the rear of the cabin, Dana Walsh sat alone on the jump seat, elbows resting on her knees, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't reorganizing anything anymore. Her uniform, so crisp and authoritative an hour ago, now felt heavy, too tight around the neck. Her hands rested in her lap, but they wouldn't stay still. She rubbed her palms against her skirt like she could erase the moment from memory, but it kept playing back, over and over. That boy's face, the quiet way he looked at her, the way the air shifted the moment his father stood up. She hadn't meant for it to go this far. But she'd also never questioned herself before. And now the questions wouldn't stop. April stood just outside the galley, hesitant. She'd been holding it in since the beginning. Finally, she stepped inside. Dana looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but no tears had fallen. April didn't speak right away. Then softly, "You didn't even ask his name." Dana's lips parted slightly. She shook her head as if trying to make the thought go away. "I thought he didn't belong." April's eyes didn't flinch. "You thought. That's the problem." There was no anger in her voice, just disappointment, just clarity. Back in 1A, Jordan quietly unfolded the letter in his lap. His thumb traced the top crease, and he read the last line again, his favorite part. "You don't need to shout to be heard. Strength doesn't always speak loud. Sometimes it just sits still and waits." He folded it again, slower this time. A quiet strength had grown inside him, not pride, not satisfaction, just stillness, the kind that stays after the noise fades. Across the aisle, a man in a gray sweater leaned slightly toward his wife. He didn't yell, he whispered. That's what made it louder. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Jordan. Behind them, a teenage girl glanced over from row 5. She didn't say anything, but she held her phone a little tighter, watched a little closer. And in the seat beside her, Her mother finally whispered, "That's what courage looks like. Not the kind that breaks doors down, but the kind that sits in 1A, quiet, refusing to move." The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of descent, but inside nothing had softened. If anything, the air felt heavier now, thicker with tension, with silence that had finally learned how to speak. Dominic remained standing near the cockpit curtain, one hand holding his phone, the other tucked behind his back. His expression hadn't changed. Calm, composed. But his fingers moved quickly across the screen. He tapped into the secure crew network and sent a directive straight to the airline's legal and executive operations team. Pull full cabin footage from Flight 614. Submit immediately to legal and internal review. Passenger statements to be collected upon landing. Flag incident for emergency compliance audit. He hit send. No second guessing, no delay. Because this wasn't just about punishment. It was about precedent. In row 3, an older man, white hair, pressed collar, the kind of man who once might have been mistaken for the important passenger, shifted forward in his seat. He looked at Jordan, then looked away, then back again. He leaned toward the aisle slightly and murmured, just loud enough for a few nearby to hear, "I should have said something." His voice cracked slightly, not from age, but from shame. A woman beside him reached over and placed her hand on his arm. No one replied, but several heads nodded, silently. Near the back of the cabin, Dana Walsh sat upright in the jump seat, still in uniform, but she no longer felt like crew. She felt like cargo. Out of place, waiting for the gate to open and the world to come in. She stared at the intercom panel across from her. Every light, every button, she'd memorized them years ago. And now, none of it mattered. April stood near her holding a tablet. She didn't speak, just tapped once, then handed it over. On screen was a formal message from airline operations. Effective immediately, you are relieved of in-flight duties. Please remain seated and prepare for official debriefing upon landing. Do not engage with passengers. Your supervisor has been notified. HR will meet you at gate 4. Dana didn't blink, didn't ask questions. She just handed the tablet back and folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers wouldn't stop shaking. In the cockpit, the captain finished a quiet call with ground control, then turned to his co-pilot. Security's confirmed, 2 agents waiting at the jet bridge. One from the airline, one from the airport authority. The co-pilot nodded. Do they know it's Dominic Carter? They do now. Back in 1A, Jordan was still looking straight ahead, not out the window, not at anyone else, just forward. He felt the shift happening, not just in the cabin, but inside himself. He hadn't wanted this. Not attention, not power, just peace. But peace had a price sometimes. And silence, it wasn't free either. Across the aisle, Livia adjusted the blanket across his lap. She didn't say much, just reached over and smoothed a wrinkle in his sleeve. "Almost home, baby," she whispered. Jordan didn't answer, but he nodded once. As the captain announced the final descent, seatbelts clicked across the cabin. But no one rustled, no one reached for luggage. The usual frenzy of arrival had been replaced by something different. A kind of stillness, the kind that comes before a verdict. And though no one said it out loud, everyone on board understood this plane wasn't just landing. It was delivering something far heavier than passengers. It was delivering truth. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. A subtle jolt, then a smooth glide down the runway, landing gear humming, flaps adjusting, but inside the cabin no one moved. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign releasing echoed overhead. Still, no one stood. No arms reached up for bags, no heads turned toward the aisle. It was as if everyone had agreed, without a word, that this landing wasn't like the others. Because this time, someone wouldn't walk off the plane the same way she'd walked on. Near the front galley, Dana Walsh sat upright, spine stiff, hands folded tightly in her lap. She had heard the landing announcement, heard the engine shift, heard the final click of the cabin door unlocking. And yet, none of that felt as loud as the silence behind her. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them. Dozens of eyes, dozens of unspoken sentences, and none of them were hers. A quiet knock came from the cockpit curtain. April appeared, tablet in hand, voice low. "They're here." Dana nodded once, then slowly stood. She smoothed the front of her blazer, not out of pride, but out of habit. Her hand still shook, just slightly. She adjusted her collar, took one small breath and stepped forward. 2 security officers waited just beyond the cabin door. One in an airline uniform, the other from the airport authority. Professional, calm, no handcuffs, no aggression, just presence. Dana walked forward, each step echoing slightly against the quiet walls of first class. She didn't look left, she didn't look right, but every passenger did. Heads turned as she passed. Some eyes followed her steadily, others dropped in guilt, a few stared with quiet judgment. But no one said a word, because there were no words left. Not now. Not after what they'd all seen. In seat 1A, Jordan didn't move. He didn't glance up, didn't follow her with his eyes. He kept them forward, fixed on the back of the seat in front of him, like it was the only thing that mattered. Livia, beside him, reached over and gently held his hand. He didn't grip back, but he didn't let go. She leaned in, whispered quietly, "You don't need to watch her go. She already knows who was right." Jordan blinked once, but still he didn't turn. As Dana stepped past row 4, a woman in her 50s, silver hair, pressed blazer, soft voice, whispered just loud enough for her own seatmate to hear. We all saw it, and we all stayed silent. Her seatmate said nothing, but the words didn't disappear. They hung there in the air like mist, settling over everyone. Dana reached the door. The officer gave a gentle nod. She stepped off the plane, no fanfare, no apology, no applause, just silence. And that silence, it was louder than anything that could have been said, because the real punishment wasn't her removal. It was the weight of being watched and remembered. The room was small, neutral gray walls, a round table, a single digital recorder blinking red. Dana Walsh sat alone on one side, fingers laced tightly together. Her uniform jacket was neatly folded on the chair beside her, no longer a symbol of authority, just fabric and thread. Across from her sat a representative from Human Resources and one from Legal Affairs. No one raised their voice. No one accused her. Because by now, there was nothing left to deny. The footage had been reviewed, passenger statements had been taken, Dominic Miller's directive had reached every corner of the organization. But the most damning evidence was her own reflection. The HR officer spoke gently. You've been given the opportunity to provide a statement before this is forwarded to executive review. Dana swallowed, her voice low. I didn't treat him like a boy. I treated him like a threat, before I even asked who he was. She paused, and I didn't question why until it was too late. No one replied. They simply nodded and ended the session. Dana gathered her things, but she didn't leave right away. That night, alone in her apartment, Dana sat at her desk, lit only by the glow of the screen. She opened her email, typed slowly, paused often, deleted and rewrote. Then again. Eventually, she stopped editing and simply wrote the truth. Subject: to the boy I failed, Jordan. You don't know me, and maybe you never will. But I owe you more than silence. I looked at you and made a decision, not based on anything you did, but everything I assumed. I didn't ask your name. I didn't hear your voice. I didn't see you. And that was the problem. I'm sorry. Dana Walsh. She hovered over the send button, then clicked. Across the city, in a quiet home tucked behind tall hedges and motion-activated gates, Jordan Miller sat at his desk. The house was calm. Dinner was over. The night had finally settled. His inbox buzzed. He read the name, then the subject. He opened the email. Read every word. Twice. Then he closed the laptop, folded his arms, and stared out the window. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just sat with the weight of it. Then, without a word, he opened his drawer, placed the email printout beside the letter his father had written him, and closed it softly. Some things didn't need answers. Some apologies came too late. Meanwhile, in the glass-walled conference room of Elevate Air's headquarters, Dominic stood before his executive team. No press, no cameras, just policy and consequence. He placed a printed manual on the table. On the cover, in clean black font, the Jordan Protocol, a required framework for passenger equity and bias mitigation. He looked around the room. This isn't a PR move. It's a structural shift. Someone asked carefully, do you want us to add a signature quote? Dominic shook his head. No quotes. Let the training speak for itself. He paused. Let what happened on Flight 614 live in memory. Not as a scandal, but as a standard. And just like that, the change began. Not through punishment, but through responsibility. Through naming what went wrong, so it wouldn't be repeated by those who thought they knew what a threat looked like. A few weeks had passed. The news had cooled, the headlines had shifted, but something deeper had stayed. At school, Jordan Miller walked the halls with the same quiet hoodie, the same steady steps, but the way people looked at him had changed. Not with fear, not even with fame, but with something closer to recognition. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to be the center of anything. But when the school invited him to speak at the student forum on equity and voice, he didn't say no. Not this time. The auditorium wasn't big, no press, no cameras, just folding chairs, student posters, a stage with a cloth banner overhead, voices that matter. Jordan sat on the panel between two other students. One had been harassed for speaking Spanish in class. The other had been unfairly punished for wearing a hoodie, just like him. When it was his turn, Jordan didn't stand. He leaned slightly into the microphone, paused a moment, then spoke. I followed every rule. I had a ticket. I showed it. I sat down. I stayed quiet. But it still wasn't enough, because someone decided I didn't belong. He looked at the crowd. They didn't ask who I was. They looked at me and decided. And that decision was louder than anything I could have said. He paused again. So I didn't yell. I stayed in my seat. I let the truth do the talking. He leaned back, didn't wait for applause, and none came. But not because it wasn't powerful, because everyone was still listening, still absorbing, still changed. After the event, a small group of students gathered near the stage, not to take photos, just to speak. A girl, maybe 12, stepped forward, holding a notebook to her chest. Her voice was soft. They tell me I'm too loud in class, she said, but my brother talks more than me, and they call him confident. Jordan smiled gently. Don't change, he said. Let them catch up. She nodded. Not with certainty, but with hope. And that was enough. That night, Jordan sat at his desk, unfolding his father's letter again. The paper was worn now, the creases deep, but the words hadn't faded. You don't need to shout to be heard. He folded it again, placed it back in the drawer. Beside it, still untouched, was the email Dana had sent him. He didn't need to reread it. He remembered every word. In the final image of that flight, now preserved in training manuals, internal videos, and employee handbooks across the airline's entire network, is not the slap, not the confrontation, not the moment Dominic stood. It's Jordan, sitting in seat 1A, quiet, still, unmoved. He stayed in his seat and changed the system without raising his voice. You don't always need to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes just standing your ground with quiet strength is enough to create real change. If this story touched you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, meaningful stories like this one. Your support helps our team keep creating content that speaks to the heart and reminds us what truly matters.